Zilla, despised monster turned fan favorite monster of the Godzilla franchise, he's a character who by his very name and nature remains in Godzilla's shadow. Which begs the question, how would Zilla's legacy evolve if placed within a more hostile world? What if Zilla was in the MonsterVerse? For this scenario, I'll be placing the events, monsters, and characters of the 1998 movie and television series into Legendary's film franchise. I'm going to be keeping the dates as close as I can to the respective media. Thus, we begin in the 1960s within French Polynesia, where an unsuspecting iguana is irradiated due to French nuclear testing. Years pass by silently until the alarming attack upon one Japanese fishing vessel in the South Pacific. The sole survivor receiving care on Tahiti, screened at first by Monarch, is eventually let go to rest and recover. No one in the agency is all that concerned of others believing him, but as the old man is interviewed by agents of the French government, his claims are anything but ignored. It confirms the fears of the French. Their fault. Their arrogance believing nature was in control, and not the other way around. So when massive footprints appear on Panamanian soil and a clawed-up vessel is found on Jamaica shores, Monarch and the French government separately race to contain the situation. Monarch's leader, Ren Serizawa, descends via helicopter and meets with his American military contact, Colonel Anthony Hicks. With the Titanic cat definitely out of the bag by now, Serizawa informs Hicks and the military at large that this massive unidentified terrestrial organism is a Titan, undocumented, dangerous, and now in the Atlantic. Where is it heading, you might be asking? Well, don't worry, Serizawa's assistant, Elsie Chapman, she has a few theories. Those details you really don't need to know, as they'll ultimately be proven wrong. What does matter is why Vivian Graham is not here. Well, put simply, each have paleontology backgrounds and a love of adventure, but Elsie's biological adeptness, as shown in the television series, makes her the better candidate to recruit and take Serizawa's side. Very much like Nick Totopoulos, whose study of the impact of radiation upon living things would prove invaluable for Monarch. I mean, for an organization dealing with giant irradiated beings, knowing how they impact the environment, I would argue is an essential thing. No. Nick would be recruited out of college and placed in some distant research outpost to conduct his fieldwork. He's far from the crisis in the Atlantic, far away when the Muto makes landfall in New York City. Destruction befalls the Big Apple. Chaos spreads, amplified by the military and Monarch's surprise at the Titan's arrival. Yet it's when Nick's curiosity gets the better of him regarding the Muto does his interest in the ongoing crisis peak. Unlike Dr. Chapman or Serizawa, Nick deduces the true answers to questions the pair thought they already knew. What this creature is and why it migrated to New York. When Nick's intercompany findings eventually reach Serizawa, the leader of Monarch has the young man flown in to elaborate on his theories, terrifying the French, who no doubt have bugged the outpost. And as the secret agents listen in, Nick unveils the truth. This Muto is not a Titan of the natural order, but man-made, an artificial Titan. Worst of all, he is pregnant. Rest assured, a human pregnancy test is not used in this timeline to back up Nick's claims, but other findings like elevated hormones or some other genetic factor are used to provide evidence to this theory. Knowing of the brood, Monarch and the military affirm their desire to decisively eliminate the reptilian threat plaguing New York. There is no chance of a relocation of this Titan occurring. The military's action, or I should say spectacular failure, buys Philippe Roche and his French Special Forces time to bug Nick and other military members, research their personal lives, and try to find a way to get ahead of this artificial narrative before it goes public. Because people would rightfully wonder which men made such a beast in the first place, and if the public knew that the French were involved, how much money would the country stand to lose by paying damages alone, by being held responsible for the monster they spawned? Luckily for Philippe, his team stumbles upon a secret not even his organization knew about. A legacy of monsters dating back decades, and a legendary alpha who could work as a red herring. Just to clarify, it's doubtful the French Secret Service would know of Monarch's true purpose. While yes, Monarch is a global agency seemingly headquartered out of the United States and a part of the United States government, it's most likely other countries and agencies view them as some innocent if clandestine organization dealing with radioactive contamination across the planet. Thus, with all this data about Monarch, Philippe gets ahead of any public announcement of the Muto's origin. Using Nick's past relation with one Audrey Timmins, the French leader stealthily reunites the pair, using Audrey's cutthroat ambition to become a reporter against herself when all these secrets conveniently make their way to her. The tape of the sole survivor, intermixed with footage of what actually happened at Castle Bravo and other Monarch secrets, finds itself upon public airways, posted by Charles Kamen to Audrey's frustration. Headlines streak across televisions. Monsters are real, and Godzilla, a long-thought dead titan killed decades prior, has returned to destroy New York. Now, Monarch knows this is not Godzilla, but it's hard to refute one lie amidst a sea of truth and one's confidential information. Nick is expelled following the public broadcast and immediately confronts Audrey, only for her to claim that an anonymous source gave her most of the evidence she used. He doesn't believe her, but his thoughts ultimately don't matter, as that source stealthily kidnaps Nick and demands his help finding the nest. Unlike the 1998 film, Monarch and the military are very actively searching for the nest too. This probably leads Mendel Craven being summoned to New York to help hunt with the nest using his robotic creation, Nigel. It should be said, Monarch and the military's first priority remains killing the Muto. So as a second trap is readied, Philippe and his team force Nick to help them clean up France's mess. I should say there's far less respect between Nick and Philippe. So imagine less scenes of Nick riding shotgun, bantering with his newfound friend, and more of a scientist gagged and stuffed into the trunk of some military vehicle. Luckily for Nick, Audrey and her cameraman, Victor Animal Pilote, are on the French teen's trail, the woman who so desperately wanted to be a reporter, doing her best to make up for past wrongs and ensure Nick doesn't become the headline-grabbing story. Eggs are found in Madison Square Garden, Zilla emerges to the military's delight, and dorsal shoots crest the horizon. Wait, what? Serizawa looks on in surprise and horror as the true Godzilla emerges from the Hudson Bay. Floods swallow soldiers in the streets. Submarines, helicopters, and tanks redirect their fire upon Godzilla, their arsenals failing to even slow the newly arrived Alpha. Zilla and Godzilla cross paths, and unfortunately for the smaller reptile, the atomic leviathan is not here to subjugate, only destroy. Why? Well, Zilla's creation wouldn't have really disrupted the natural order. Dozens, if not hundreds, of Zillas, on the other hand, I can confidently say, would. The artificial titan, clearly outsized and outclassed, immediately flees, allowing Godzilla to march unimpeded toward Madison Square Garden. Within the stadium, charges are placed by the French team. Feeling the ground begin to quake and thinking the Muto is returning to the nest, Nick demands to be allowed to leave, having clearly done his part. Philippe, though, without any bond to Nick in this scenario and knowing the scientist most likely would expose French involvement, reveals letting Nick go is not something he can allow. Yet before the scientist can be executed, Animal's camera flies past Nick's head. While Audrey missed her throw, Animal is thoroughly peeved at the loss of his equipment, and Philippe is very much unamused by the attack. The egg behind the French agent, which the camera struck, cracks. An infant Muto breaks free. Philippe opens fire on the young one, stirring reptiles which moments prior lay dormant in their shells to awaken. As confusion and automatic fire in infant Mutos turn Madison Square Garden into pure chaos, Nick, Audrey, and Animal hurry to the broadcast room to warn the world, merely to feel two roars rattle the structure down to its foundation. One is the Muto, the other only Nick recognizes, the actual Godzilla. Theorizing the Alpha is here to destroy the Muto's nest and knowing what Godzilla can do, the trio prioritize escape over warning the world. Meanwhile, the monstrous pair clash outside. With the nest in danger, Zilla's backbone would definitely stiffen. Reptilian giants clash to decide the fate of Zilla's brood, and yeah, the battle ends almost as quickly as it began. Look, I'd like to say Zilla has some edge in this brawl, and he probably does when it comes to agility. But Godzilla outclasses the imposter in almost every meaningful metric. A short fight this would be, ending in the reptile's obliteration. Atomic fire then sweeps over the garden, reducing it to rubble and flames just as the trio make it to safety. Now the scenario's part could end here, with Godzilla declaring to the world that balance has been restored. But that would exclude the television series, which we are very much covering in depth. So while Godzilla feels confident that the threat is no more, vanishing into the depths off New York's coast, a single egg remains untouched. harboring a creature leagues beyond its progenitor. Back on the human front, Nick, Audrey, and Animal make their way back to the main military outpost, while radioactive fires smolder in Madison Square Garden. While the French and Animal's camera may have gone up in flames, what did not is the tape, which Audrey's cameraman luckily still has. This is evidence to clear Nick's name, help put him back into Serizawa's good graces, and guarantee a spot for the scientist on the military sweep to find any reptilian stragglers. One accidental cave-in later, Nick stumbles upon a lone egg. A crack here, a pool of fluid there. By the encounter's end, a new miniature unidentified terrestrial organism is let loose upon the city. So does Hicks then take control? Does he and the military venture forth to hunt down the infant alone? Well, no. Monarch claims and rightfully holds jurisdiction. Serizawa prioritizes Godzilla though, seeking to quell public fear and outrage over the loss of life by the Alpha. To settle what remains of the crisis, he leaves Elsie Chapman in control. And as the person running the show, her first objective is removing the bugs the French placed. While Mendel can help in some extent with this, Nick knows a guy who specializes in such tech. Randy Hernandez. Now, we don't know the exact details of how Randy and Nick met in the show, but for this scenario, I'm just going to keep things simple, and I'm going to assume that they have a similar dynamic between them. We can explain Nick keeping Randy at a distance for the events of the film because as a non-Monarch member and someone who probably hacks into the organization's servers for fun, the hacker would probably wind up behind bars, a fate I can't see Nick signing off on, especially with a young man of such potential and talent. Anyway, Randy is brought into the fold just as unexplained activity in Jamaica forces Elsie into an unenviable position. She can't ignore what's going on there, but at the same time, she can't abandon New York. So stuck between a rock and a hard place, she splits her team. She'll lead Monarch's investigation in Jamaica with Mendel Craven assisting her. Nick's team, by contrast, which comprises of Audrey as well as Randy, not to mention the military, will stay in New York unless the Muto is confirmed to be in Jamaica. A similar series of events then plays out with Nick hoping to catch the infant, merely to find an adolescent Zilla. Being non-aggressive, intelligent, and infertile, Nick studies the reptilian in secret a few days before relaying his findings to the military, Elsie Chapman, and Serizawa. Also, for the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to have Randy nickname the creature Zilla, and somehow it sticks. This means the Titan's official moniker would be Titanus Jira. Nick hopes the heads of Monarch will put off Titanus Jira's execution, as it's not a threat compared to its progenitor. And while Elsie is all for it, Serizawa greenlights the artificial Titan's execution via the military. This might sound heretical coming from Serizawa, but consider this. This creature is not of the natural order. It's a mistake of man. One Godzilla, the arbiter of balance and nature, sought out and destroyed in New York. Should the response of man really be any different here? Fiercely disagreeing with the analysis, Nick attempts to get Zilla to safety merely for an unseen party to relay what the scientist is attempting. The military intervenes, the Muto seemingly destroyed. Nick and the rest of the team are ordered to Jamaica, regrouping with Elsie, who hopes she can get Nick off the thin ice he's currently on with the military, Monarch, and most importantly, Serizawa. Yet, when the squids and most importantly C-Rex emerges, Nick's faith in Zilla is ultimately what saves the day. Artificial Titan clashes against Artificial Titan, yet it is clear that one would be considered a Destroyer-class Titan, while the other is a Protector, a classification affirmed when Zilla not only bests C-Rex, but saves those that had been taken by the CB squids. But what mankind thinks of Zilla is of little consequence. What matters is Godzilla's opinion, who, sensing the titanic clash, arrives to cast judgment. Like the battle between Behemoth and Amaluk, Godzilla isn't here to pick a fight, just affirm the battle's conclusion and establish dominance over the two new titans to his world. A reign Zilla rejects. Godzilla and Zilla thus battle for supremacy, though this isn't a death battle, more a young upstart testing himself against the world's alpha. While Zilla's youthful tenacity, agility, and firepower can't be overlooked here, sheer durability, experience, and will give Godzilla a conclusive, if hard-fought, victory. So after his loss, would Zilla bow? Oh, absolutely. One only needs to look at his relationship with Nick to know he can respect the authority of others. And based on his intelligence within the show, Zilla is definitely smart enough to understand the role Godzilla has on Earth. Just to be clear, Zilla and Godzilla wouldn't be friends, but Zilla doesn't need to worry about the wrath of Earth's Alpha, especially since Zilla isn't a threat to the world order. Apologies for the brief interruption, but by far most of you are not subscribed. To stay up to date with the newest scenarios, please consider doing so. Thank you. So with the team mostly assembled, it's the perfect time to address how some of the group's dynamics have shifted compared to the original series. For starters, HEAT, or the Humanitarian Environmental Analysis Team, would be a part of Monarch, essentially a subdivision, if you will, that prioritizes the study of artificial titans and monitoring Titanic Jira. They are Monarch's spear against a mutant threat, fast and agile and able to respond to immediate crises when they arise, just like in the episode Talkin' Trash. In the third episode of Godzilla the Animated Series, a petroleum-consuming colony of nanites runs rampant. Zilla here would still intercept and battle the antithesis to Hedorah, but it's HEAT's expertise which ultimately bests this ghastly Grey Goo giant. It's a team led by Serizawa's second, Elsie Chapman, at least for now. Nick is firmly in that second-in-command position. A man who has Elsie's ear, Randy's favor, and Godzilla's power when he needs to call upon it. Leaving Mendel Craven as the group's machinist, a guy who probably is just happy to be involved. For those curious about Monique Dupre, I will expand upon her role in a future part. For now, you can pretty much assume that her position on the team is just taken by a plethora of Monarch paid soldiers. Which leads me to the one key difference of this HEAT team compared to the one from the original series, specifically financial support. Thanks to Monarch's funding, there is no need for HEAT to be run from an old ferry station, or really rely on outdated equipment. The group would have access to the best tech within the decade. Their headquarters would still remain in New York though, as Zilla's borough is roughly 4.7 miles away from New York's harbor, which would force the group to stay close to monitor Titanic Jira. But for the biggest change in the status quo, let's move on to the fourth episode of the series, DOA. El Gusano Gigante runs rampant in Costa Roja, forcing HEAT to intervene. A chemical weapons program is unveiled. Zilla intervenes, and while the lizard is gassed, an antidote is created, allowing Titanic Jira to overcome El Gusano. At least that is until Godzilla arrives on the scene, ending the crisis when he forces Costa Roja's mutant to bow. Because whether El Gusano is beaten by Zilla or Godzilla, the Alpha of Earth would ensure this new artificial titan accepts his reign. Thing is, there is one little problem that is going to need to be solved, because El Gusano Gigante no va a ninguna parte. There is no Site Omega, no way for the US military to contain these titans because Godzilla just would not allow it. Whether a Protector class titan like I think El Gusano would be, or a destroyer-based titan like C-Rex, by accepting Godzilla's reign, they each would receive territory. C-Rex would probably find someplace in the deep ocean, but with El Gusano inextricably tied to Costa Roja's flora, he can't find a new region to call home, though he would probably heed Godzilla's authority to stay away from humanity. Regardless of how isolated the worm may attempt to be, when the country's military attempts to destroy El Gusano again, this time just by conventional means, Godzilla will intervene to protect him. Whether it be with dozens, hundreds, or thousands of casualties, the message is clear to all nations of the world. Once a Titan accepts Godzilla's dominion, they are off limits, unless they actively cause a problem. I'm sure HEAT and Monarch would help solidify this theory, especially as nations around the world experience their own mutations. Because of this, I can see a more hostile view of Godzilla and artificial Titans in general taking shape, no matter how many charisma checks Serizawa may pass, setting the stage for the entry of one Cameron Winter. As the richest tech CEO on the planet through Solstice Industries, a company that seems like a mix between Intel, Johnson & Johnson, and DARPA, he would position himself openly and actively against this new world order under Godzilla. And while he may test his drones on Zilla or try to get HEAT on his side, his attempts would be half-hearted at best. While still jealous of Nick's relationship with Titanic Jira, and no doubt peeved that Nichols was chosen to be a part of a clandestine organization compared to himself, the CEO's focus is fully on the most powerful monster on the planet, aka Godzilla. Whether via control or influence or destruction, Winter wants to place himself on Godzilla's throne. Nick's gecko, by contrast, isn't even a blip on the man's radar. So Winter actively prods Godzilla, sending Mechzor's own mutants to usurp the king, merely to court the Alpha's wrath. Wrath the CEO would use to spur more military contracts and greater weapons development. Cameron Winter is far too prideful of a man to hide his ambitions, compared to Walter Simmons, who, upon seeing Godzilla in New York, would feel the exact same way as the tech CEO, but take a very different path about achieving his goals. Walter Simmons would strive to integrate his company, applied experimental technology, into Monarch in any way he can, putting on a helpful facade while secretly wishing to usurp the Alpha too, accelerating his intentions decades ahead of the original MonsterVerse timeline. In essence, Walter Simmons and Cameron Winter are just two sides of the same coin, each vying to become the next apex power on Earth. Grand ambitions aside, not every episode of Godzilla the Animated Series would be altered dramatically. Cat and Mouse, an episode focused on Zilla hunting giant rats to defend his own territory, wouldn't exactly be all that different. Same thing with episode 8 of the series, What Dreams May Come. If anything comes of these adventures, it's that Elsie and Nick see themselves butting heads more. Mendel and Randy look to Nick's guidance when it comes to problem solving, compared to Elsie, who technically is the de facto leader of the team. The other thing is that someone keeps helping them from the shadows, though again, more on that in a future part. For now, we take a look at episode 7 of Godzilla the Animated Series, Leviathan. Heat picks up a burst of tachyon particles from the Atlantic Ocean, merely to stumble upon a threat not of this Earth, the Leviathans. Now, with this episode taking place within the MonsterVerse, there are a few changes here. For one, the Leviathan distress signal wouldn't be a constant beacon like in the show, because if it was, Godzilla surely would have detected the beacon within the 65 million years the ship lay on the ocean floor. Once Godzilla found that ship, destruction would surely follow. Thus, the aliens, or the Leviathans, would be forced to emit their own recovery signal in short bursts so Godzilla doesn't find them. Another change would be their guard dogs, the Cryptoclydus, or Clydi. The Leviathan's genetic tampering, as seen by the creatures within the ship, lead me to think they'd be forced to mutate and evolve the plesiosaur pair into something more formidable, something that could stand a better chance against Godzilla. Before you jump the gun, these are not evolved plesiosaurs, they're just altered, possessing alien traits that they normally didn't have in the show. Now these alterations make them better able to thrash Zilla when he eventually intervenes. Though as Godzilla eventually makes his way onto the scene, a 2v2 this battle becomes. Heat evacuates to the surface safely while the Clydi are vaporized by their atomic challengers. Thus, Godzilla and Zilla's icy relationship begins to thaw, unlike humanity's view of the Titans, which is where I'll be taking a moment to point out the difficult position Serizawa is in. With Cameron Winter arguably stoking hatred in Godzilla and mistrust in Monarch for his own personal gain, not to mention Godzilla siding with these new monsters and arguably killing more people in New York than the original Zilla did, Serizawa would be under far more pressure than he experienced after Godzilla 2014. This isn't helped by Serizawa's preference to keep matters close to the chest, meaning Monarch's public comments on the current state of affairs probably offers little detail and keeps a lot of questions unanswered. So when Serizawa, a man who probably doesn't like giving the occasional interview, gets blindsided by a reporter, does he get exposed to a new viewpoint thanks to one Audrey Timmons. She's seen how the current state of affairs is affecting Nick, how Cameron's public attacks are wearing him down, and knows Monarch won't last much longer on its current path with the world against it. So Audrey makes Serizawa an offer she thinks he can't refuse. For the foreseeable future, she will tag along with Heat, a fully independent source able to write the truth without the fear of Monarch cracking down or offering critiques on her work. Essentially, a reporter that is able to tell the world what is actually happening involving monsters, and all the good and bad Monarch does. As you might guess, Serizawa would just outright dismiss this, noting the world is not ready for such truth and that Audrey's just taking advantage of this for her own personal gain. And he's right. To the Monarch leader's surprise, Audrey completely agrees, noting that of course this is to her own benefit, but it's also for the good of Nick and Monarch. And while Serizawa is still unfazed, Audrey leaves the man with one final thought. For a guy who constantly notes the folly of man thinking itself in control, it's a shame Monarch's downfall will come from a single man's stubborn refusal to relinquish what little he has. Thus, after a day or two of contemplation, Serizawa accepts Audrey's offer, just as Heat makes their way to Santa Marta in episode 9's Hive. Now, the short-lived nature of the bees and plants on the island ensures there aren't too many changes here. While the queen bee may survive the island's destruction, she probably won't do well when faced with Godzilla, a leviathan who wouldn't take kindly to the queen's desire to make a new nest. The queen is eliminated, and most importantly, Zilla being forced to swim through lava to escape the island's destruction ensure he stands great odds when he's forced to deal with a few demons in episode 10's Birds of Paradise. Not birds, as Q's awakening lures in Heat. Zilla would surely follow, piquing the interest of one molten demon who also happens to be in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. A demon who wouldn't take kindly to a titan entering his slice of territory. Now, to clear things up, I know there is a MonsterVerse Quetzalcoatl which resides in the Andes mountain range. For the sake of this timeline, we'll just say that bird goes by another name. Also, you may be wondering if Rodan and Q might come to blows, and I'd say no. Each are original titans and probably extremely distant cousins. A pair of titans who went on two separate evolutionary paths from a single shared ancestor. Because of this connection, Q most likely doesn't need to feed on the local populace, as the natural radiation of her volcano is enough to sustain not only herself, but her young. Meaning the only real consequence here is Rodan picking a fight with Zilla. The two fiery reptiles come to blows, and yeah, I can't see the Molten Demon winning this, especially with Zilla able to resist high temperatures. Add in Zilla's potent firepower and smarts, and what you have is Rodan's pride suffering a big hit before he eventually returns to his own home and slumbers once more. Well, once Zilla departs his territory, of course. I should also say that due to the Hive's destruction and the peaceful resolution of Q, not to mention a big win over a Titan on Zilla's part, Audrey's voice cuts against the media narrative, showing the good Monarch can do, and by extension, Heat along with Zilla can do. Episode 11, Freeze, marks the entry of the Ice Borers, a collection of ice moles who can burrow through ice as easily as Chuck Norris swims through dirt. Very dated jokes aside, I am going to take a little bit of creative liberty here, as the show isn't too specific on where these things are in Antarctica. So let's just imagine they happen to arise where Outpost 32 of Monarch would eventually be built. It's not Heat or Zilla who solve this threat, but Godzilla, who rises through the Antarctic ice and lays waste to the moles. Heat and other Monarch scientists research the aftermath, merely to find close by the frozen body of a Titan they believe might have been able to rival Godzilla at one point, King Ghidorah. But as scientists research the dragon and build an outpost nearby, Heat, at the behest of Elsie, investigates Loch Ness like in the episode Deadlock. Nessie here would be a natural Titan, and probably a distant ancestor to Tiamat in some way. Regardless, with her infant stolen, it's only with Heat's involvement that the familial pair are reunited once more. The moment the infant's cries escape the facility, Godzilla would surely make his way to Scotland. Yet when he finds Nessie and her newborn off the coast, and senses Zilla nearby, does the relationship between the two titans thaw once more. The penultimate episode I'll be covering in this first part is Competition, where King Cobra makes his debut. His rampage, battle with Zilla, and eventual submission to Godzilla as a destroyer-class titan is ultimately unimportant, though I do wonder where exactly King Cobra would call home with Japan claimed by Titanus Yamata no Orochi. What does matter is the Robo Yeti, the creation of one Dr. Yukiko Ifukube. With the robot's creation, we can safely say technology in this scenario for the MonsterVerse would be accelerated by decades, though the Robo Yeti's relatively poor performance isn't anything to write home about. It physically couldn't stand up to other titans, and while it caught Zilla off guard, it certainly wouldn't stand up to Godzilla's firepower. Cameron Winter, upon hearing about the machine, would disregard it as an inferior creation to anything he could construct, while Walter Simmons, a man fully able to suppress his own pride to work with others, sees this as an opportunity. a woman who may be able to help him create humanity's own Apex Titan. But more on that on another time, because right now we're going to be diving into the final episode of this part that I'll be covering, specifically episode 14's Bug Out. The rise of giant destructive termites in the Amazon would easily spur Heat to get involved, along with another natural titan, Behemoth. While physically imposing, I doubt Behemoth could solve the bug problem with physical strength alone, especially against such immense numbers. So when Zilla steps onto his territory to assist, I think the Protector would accept the reptile's help, and being able to assist one another against the endless insect horde, the pair buy Heat the time to ultimately terminate the termite threat. The Amazon rainforest is saved, a strong bond formed between titans, a positive story made which Audrey can relay to the masses of the world. But ultimately, is this enough? Or will this narrative break under the world's military's more hostile views of Godzilla and those under his dominion? What of Cameron and Walter's ambitions for a new world order? Can they achieve it? Or will other alien forces intervene by then? Well, all that and more will be explored in the next eventual part of this series. But if you want a second part to be released sooner, members of What If Kaiju can vote on the next What If scenario to release in January. The vote should be happening somewhere in mid-November, so sign up by then and your vote will count towards my next choice. So become a member today like Glork, the first member of What If Kaiju and someone who's getting his own video published by hopefully the end of this year. That being, what if Showa Anguirus killed Godzilla? Otherwise, remember to like and subscribe. I'm GrayShot151, and I'll catch you all next time. Until then, later.